Imagine walking down the Las Vegas Strip tonight. The neon burns as bright as ever, but the laughter is gone. Tables sit half empty, dealers stand idle, and the hum of excitement that once defined this desert city feels strangely hollow. For decades, Las Vegas sold itself as the playground of ordinary Americans. It was the place where a few spare dollars could buy a buffet, a room with a view, and maybe just maybe a life-changing jackpot. But that promise has withered, replaced by a polished illusion that hides something darker. The truth is, Vegas is dying, and the reasons why are not what you've been told. It isn't just the economy or crime or even the pandemic. It's a series of quiet, calculated moves that transform the city into something unrecognizable, moves no one in power wants to talk about. Hidden fees that bleed visitors, dry corporate monopolies that pushed out local life policies that priced the middle class out of their own playground. This isn't the Vegas your parents knew, and it isn't the one most of us imagined. In this video, we'll strip away the glitter and expose the uncomfortable reality of how America's most famous city of sin is unraveling. By the end, you'll see that what's happening in Vegas is not just a story about one city, it's a warning for the rest of the country. Las Vegas was not always the polished machine it is today. Its origins were rough, risky, and deeply tied to the dreams of everyday Americans who believed that fortune could be won in a single night. In the mid-20th century, the city thrived as a working-class playground. Buffett's cost pocket change hotels offered rooms for a handful of dollars, and tourists, whether factory workers from the Midwest or truckers passing through, could afford to feel like high rollers for a weekend. Back then, the magic of Vegas was not its luxury, but its accessibility. Families piled into buses, retirees took road trips, and the Strip pulsed with a cross-section of America that could all share in the spectacle. But beneath the neon power was shifting. The mafia, which had long fueled Vegas's growth, began to fade out, replaced by powerful corporations that saw not a playground, but a business model. By the 1990s, conglomerates dominated the skyline, reshaping the Strip into a series of gleaming mega resorts. At first, it looked like progress, more jobs, bigger attractions, and global attention. Yet something vital was quietly lost. Instead of catering to the masses, the city began catering to profits, and every decision from then on would reflect that shift. The change didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual erosion masked by flashing lights and billion-dollar projects. Hidden costs crept in where none had existed before. Small casinos and family-owned businesses disappeared, unable to compete with sprawling resorts. Where once a few quarters could keep you at a slot machine all evening, the odds grew tighter, the payouts leaner, and the house edge sharper. For many Americans, the sense of possibility that defined Las Vegas was being replaced by a sense of being squeezed. The Strip was still alive, but it was no longer beating for the same heart. The Las Vegas of the 1950s through the 1980s was a world unlike any other in America. Back then, the Strip was alive with possibility, and it belonged to everyone. You didn't need a fortune to be treated like royalty, just the willingness to take a chance. Families came for the cheap buffets, where endless food cost less than a single dollar, and hotel rooms were priced so low that even a factory worker from Ohio or a mechanic from Texas could afford a weekend under the neon glow. The dream was simple: come to Vegas, have fun, and maybe leave with more than you arrived with. This was the golden era of accessibility. The casinos knew their business depended on the steady stream of everyday Americans, so they offered perks that now feel unimaginable. Drinks flowed freely on the gaming floor, shows were priced to draw in crowds rather than drain wallets, and the idea of charging extra fees for the basics would have been unthinkable. Even celebrities mixed with ordinary folks. The Rat Pack performed for packed houses that included both Hollywood elites and middle-class tourists. Vegas had an electricity that came not from exclusivity, but from inclusivity. But the foundation of this paradise was far from pure. Organized crime had a heavy hand in building and running the city. The mob skimmed profits, kept unions in check, and ensured that money flowed into their own pockets. Still, for the visitor, this dark undercurrent was invisible. What they experienced was a city that seemed to exist for them, a place where the American dream played out in miniature, with every roll of the dice. By the 1980s, though, cracks began to show. Federal crackdowns on mafia influence and the rise of corporate interests started to change the DNA of the city. While the lights still glowed and the shows still dazzled, the shift in ownership signaled that Vegas was preparing to reinvent itself. For many, it still felt like the city of dreams, but the seeds of transformation were already being sown, waiting to push Vegas toward a very different future. By the 1990s, Las Vegas had entered a new era, one where the familiar neon was no longer powered by mob money, but by corporate empires. The federal government's relentless crackdowns throughout the 1970s and 80s had driven the old mafia networks into the shadows, and in their place came Wall Street investors and multinational corporations ready to transform Vegas into something far bigger and far more profitable than before. The Strip became a playground not only for tourists, but for corporate ambition. Mega resorts rose one after another, reshaping the skyline into a glimmering fortress of glass and steel. The Mirage opened in 1989, was the blueprint a billion-dollar resort that combined casinos, luxury hotels, restaurants, shopping, and family-friendly attractions. Soon came the Bellagio, Mandalay Bay Venetian, and others, each competing to be more extravagant than the last. Instead of smoky rooms filled with slot machines, visitors were greeted with choreographed fountains, indoor canals, and replicas of Paris or New York. At first, this transformation seemed like progress. Jobs multiplied as construction boomed, tourism soared, and Las Vegas branded itself as a destination not just for gamblers, but for families, conventions, and global travelers. Ads promised that Vegas had something for everyone, from roller coasters to Cirque du Soleil. Corporate profits exploded, and the city gained a sheen of legitimacy it had never enjoyed under mob control. But hidden inside this new corporate era was a shift in philosophy. Vegas was no longer about letting the average tourist feel like a king. It was about maximizing every dollar from every visitor. The free perks that once defined the city began to shrink. Drinks were harder to come by unless you were spending big comped meals were reserved for high rollers, and the odds at the tables tightened. What mattered most was not how many people came through the doors, but how much money could be extracted from each one. By the 2000s, the transformation was complete. The Vegas that once thrived on volume and accessibility was now a finely tuned money machine. Visitors still marveled at the spectacle, but the city's soul was shifting. The house always won, but now it was winning bigger, faster, and at the expense of the very middle class that had built Vegas into a legend. By the 2010s, the corporate transformation of Las Vegas reached its most insidious stage, the age of hidden fees and ever-rising costs. The bright lights and over-the-top spectacles were still there, but beneath the glitz, a quieter strategy was at work, one designed not to entertain the masses, but to squeeze them. Suddenly, visitors who thought they had found a good deal were hit with charges that seemed to come out of nowhere. Resort fees, once non-existent, ballooned into mandatory add-ons of $20, $30, even $50 per night, covering little more than access to Wi-Fi or a gym many guests never used. Parking, long considered a free perk for those driving in from California or across the desert, was no longer complimentary. Even the simple thrill of a casino buffet, once legendary for its affordability, was priced out of reach for the average family. For middle-class Americans, the Vegas weekend that once felt accessible began to feel like a trap. A room advertised for $99 a night might actually cost $160 after fees. A cheap meal turned into a bill comparable to dining in New York or Los Angeles. Shows that used to be part of the Vegas experience were priced like Broadway, with hundreds of dollars demanded for a single ticket. The dream of a spontaneous, affordable escape was being dismantled in favor of a model that targeted high spenders while making the average tourist feel nickel and dimed at every turn. The strategy worked for corporate profits. Revenue surged even as visitor numbers plateaued, proving that casinos could make more money by charging fewer people more. But the cost to the city's character was immense. The Strip no longer buzzed with busloads of working-class tourists. Instead, it became a playground for the wealthy and a disappointment for those who remembered when Vegas was for everyone. Beneath the neon, resentment simmered. People began to ask themselves whether the trip was worth it anymore, and more often than not, the answer was no. By the 2020s, the consequences of decades of transformation could no longer be hidden behind the glittering facade. The Strip still looked dazzling from the outside, but on the ground, the cracks were visible. Casinos that once overflowed with crowds now had long stretches of half-empty gaming floors. Dealers stood idly at tables with no players. Entire sections of hotels were quietly closed off because demand had fallen short of the endless supply of luxury rooms corporations had built. The promise of a bustling democratic playground had faded into an exclusive stage where fewer and fewer Americans could afford to perform. The pandemic of 2020 exposed just how fragile the new Vegas had become. When travel restrictions hit, and when conventions and international tourism ground to a halt, the city's dependence on high-spending visitors collapsed overnight. Local workers, bartenders, housekeepers, dealers faced mass layoffs, while families who had once relied on steady casino wages suddenly found themselves in food lines. When Vegas reopened, the corporations doubled down on squeezing every dollar from those who returned. Fees rose higher, odds grew tighter, and the gap between spectacle and satisfaction widened. For many Americans, the shift was impossible to ignore. Tourists who once drove in from California for a cheap weekend now questioned why they should spend hundreds just to park, eat, and sleep before even gambling a single dollar. Word spread that the dream was gone, replaced by a corporate money trap. Alternative destinations from tribal casinos in Arizona and California to Reno's quieter charm saw new waves of visitors who had given up on Vegas. International high rollers, once the lifeblood of the Strip, looked elsewhere too, with Macau or Dubai offering fresher illusions of grandeur. The city had not disappeared, but its heartbeat had slowed. The vibrant middle-class crowds that gave Vegas its pulse had been priced out, leaving behind a glittering shell. What was left was a city sustained by fewer people, spending more, a fragile balance that left Vegas vulnerable to every downturn, every shift in taste, and every reminder that its magic was no longer universal. What is happening in Las Vegas is more than just the story of a city losing its charm. It is a mirror reflecting a much larger crisis across America and beyond. The decline of the middle-class Vegas experience is part of a global trend where once accessible destinations are being hollowed out by corporate strategies that prize profit over people. The same quiet squeeze that priced out ordinary tourists on the Strip can be seen in cities like San Francisco, where housing costs have forced long-time residents out, or New Orleans, where neighborhoods have been transformed into short-term rentals for outsiders. Even Macau, the so-called Las Vegas of Asia, shows the same dependence on high-spending elites, while locals feel increasingly alienated. Data confirms what visitors sense. Hotel prices in Vegas have climbed steadily above the rate of inflation, while resort fees now bring in hundreds of millions annually for corporations. Visitor numbers may look stable on paper, but the profile of those visitors has changed. Fewer working-class families, more affluent travelers, and an ever-growing reliance on international tourism that is vulnerable to global crises. Meanwhile, unemployment spikes in Clark County during downturns reveal how fragile the city's economic model has become for residents. Workers who once found steady employment in casinos or hospitality now face uncertain futures as automation, corporate consolidation, and cost-cutting continue to shrink opportunities. The big picture is sobering. Las Vegas once symbolized the American dream in its most colorful form, a place where ordinary people could take a gamble and feel rich if only for a night. Today, it serves as a warning about what happens when that dream is sold off piece by piece. The illusion remains, but it is built on sand, increasingly propped up by strategies that alienate the very audience that made it legendary. For tourists, the disappointment is personal. For America, the warning is systemic. When cities become playgrounds, only for the wealthy they lose not only their soul, but their resilience. Vegas may still shine in the desert, but its glow tells a story of a country struggling with inequality, exploitation, and the vanishing promise of accessibility. The Strip's transformation is not just about casinos or hidden fees. It is about what happens when the places we treasure are turned into businesses designed to exclude the very people they once embraced. Las Vegas has not disappeared, but the version of it that once defined America's imagination is gone. The neon still glows, the fountains still dance, and the shows still dazzle, but the soul of the city, the sense that anyone could walk in and feel part of the dream, has slipped away. What remains is a glittering illusion that hides a harder truth. Vegas no longer belongs to the people, it belongs to the corporations that turned it into a money machine. For some, that transformation means luxury, exclusivity, and profit. For most, it means exclusion, frustration, and disappointment. So the question lingers, can Las Vegas reinvent itself once more, or has it already crossed the point of no return? Will the Strip ever again welcome the busloads of working-class tourists who built its legend, or is it destined to become nothing more than a theme park for the wealthy? One thing is certain, the story of Vegas is more than the story of a city. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when the pursuit of profit erases the very magic that made a place matter. And if it can happen here in America's most famous playground, it can happen anywhere. What do you think? Can Vegas still be saved, or has the gamble already been lost? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more unfiltered stories that peel back the illusions and expose the hidden truths shaping our world, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next time the lights go out, you'll want to know why.